Between March and September 2004, 21 boys were murdered outside Tehran. Their killer was detained by police midway through and released. Most victims' families never reported them missing, not because they didn't care, but because a single police report could get them deported. This is the deadliest serial murder case in modern Iranian history. To understand how it stayed invisible, you have to start with who the victims were. Dust settles over the southern edge of Pakdasht, where the city's concrete gives way to miles of open land and a patchwork of makeshift homes. Here, thousands of Afghan families live in the shadows, tucked behind brick kilns and crumbling sheds, their lives shaped by fear of being noticed. Most came with nothing but hope for safety, but found themselves locked out of Iran's legal system. No residency cards, no official addresses, nothing to prove they belong. Children make up nearly half the community. Their days spent wandering alleyways or the scrubby desert fringe, while parents work long shifts in fields and factories that pay in cash and silence. The threat of police raids hangs over every household. A checkpoint on the main road can mean a father vanishes overnight, or a family is split and sent back across the border. To avoid attention, families often keep children home from school, skip medical clinics, and rely on neighbors for help instead of authorities. In this world, the disappearance of a child is not just a personal tragedy. It is a risk that could unravel everything. The quiet routines of daily survival, the invisible boundaries drawn by fear, and the absence of protection left the youngest and most vulnerable exposed in ways that few outsiders ever saw. Mohammed Bijeh was born on February 7, 1975, in Tehran province, the eldest of 7 children in a family scraping by on brickmaking wages. He left school at 11 to help support his siblings, drifting through a childhood marked by poverty and early run-ins with the law. By his late 20s, he had already served time in Evin prison for robbery and petty theft. It was there, among hardened laborers, that he learned how easy it could be to disappear in the margins of society. In 2003, Bijeh found work at a brick kiln on the outskirts of Pakdasht. The job offered more than a paycheck. It gave him access to the isolated desert fringe and introduced him to Ali Baghi, a younger man with his own history of abuse and petty crime. The two formed a partnership built on mutual secrecy and shared addiction. Together, they devised a simple ruse, inviting boys to hunt rabbits in the sandhills, using the promise of adventure to draw them away from the safety of their neighborhoods. The first known disappearance traced to Bijeh occurred in early March 2004. A 15-year-old boy vanished near the local market, and no official report was filed. Over the next weeks, other children went missing around brick kilns and alleyways, each case slipping quietly into the background noise of daily survival. In this world, Bijeh and Baghi moved almost unnoticed, their method tailored to the vulnerabilities of a community already living in fear. When a child vanished in Pakdasht, the first instinct for many Afghan parents was to close their doors and say nothing. Iranian law treated undocumented migrants as illegal residents, and the threat of deportation was never far from anyone's mind. Reporting a missing son could bring the police to your doorstep, and in 2004, that risk was often too great. Officers sometimes warned families outright, "File a complaint, and you may be asked for your papers." In March of that year alone, 3 families withdrew their reports after local police reminded them of the registration requirement. Testimonies collected years later describe the same pattern, parents weighing the hope of finding their child against the danger of exposing the entire household. Some tried to search on their own, asking neighbors or wandering the outskirts, but few dared to challenge the silence that hung over the community. The fear wasn't just about losing a child, it was about losing everything. In this atmosphere, disappearances faded quietly into daily life, leaving no official trace and no alarm for authorities to answer. In late April 2004, police in Pakdasht took Mohammed Bijeh into custody. The arrest was almost accidental. He was picked up on suspicion of theft and minor assault, not for any link to the missing boys. At that point, at least 3 children had disappeared from the area in just a few weeks. The files sat in separate folders, each one thin and incomplete, with no forensic evidence tying Bijeh to any of the cases. The parents' reports, when they existed at all, were vague and hesitant, written in uncertain Farsi and filed under the shadow of deportation. Inside the courthouse, the deputy prosecutor reviewed the paperwork. The decision came down to a single memo. Bijeh would be released on bail, set at 5 million Iranian rials, about $150 at the time. The sum was small enough to be paid in cash and required no property guarantee. The memo made no mention of the missing children, only that there was insufficient evidence and no reason to consider Bijeh a flight risk. No one called for a psychological evaluation. No one ordered surveillance. The case was quietly closed, and Bijeh walked free the same week. For the families who had dared to speak up, the release was devastating. The sense of being unheard, of watching a suspect walk away while their children remained missing, deepened the silence across Pakdasht's refugee camps. In the months that followed, more boys vanished. The pattern, so obvious in hindsight, went unrecognized by the very authorities meant to protect the most vulnerable. On September 8, 2004, 2 boys, Reza Alavi, age 12, and Saeed Jafari, age 11, walked the dusty edge of Pakdasht, not far from the last row of brick kilns. A man approached, promising a rabbit hunt in the desert. The offer sounded familiar, but something felt wrong. The boys hesitated, then watched as the man's accomplice circled closer. Instead of following, they turned and ran, sprinting through sand and scrub until their lungs burned. They made it back to their neighborhood, breathless and shaken, and told their families what happened. This time, the parents did not stay silent. They went straight to the local police post, demanding action. Officers listened to the details, descriptions of the men, the car, the exact stretch of wasteland where the boys had been approached. For the first time, police took the threat seriously. They organized a search of the desert fringe, gathering officers from both the local station and the intelligence branch. The boys' escape and testimony broke through months of paralyzing silence, forcing authorities to connect the disappearances and finally mobilize a search. In that moment, the community, led by 2 frightened but determined children, stepped into the role of investigator, pushing the case into the open where it could no longer be ignored. On September 20, 2004, a search team moved into the barren sandhills outside Pakdasht, following the directions given by the 2 boys who had escaped just days earlier. The officers fanned out across a stretch of scrubland, digging where the ground looked freshly turned. Within hours, they uncovered the first shallow grave, then another. In total, 6 bodies, boys aged 8 to 14, were unearthed that day, each one wrapped in the same layer of dust that had hidden them for months. The discovery sent shockwaves through the ranks of the local police. Forensic specialists worked quickly, photographing the remains, collecting clothing fragments, and marking each grave with a numbered stake. The evidence was undeniable and impossible to ignore. By the end of the day, Mohammed Bijeh was arrested at his workplace, still wearing his brick kiln overalls. Officers found him calm, offering no resistance as they placed him in handcuffs. The arrest brought an abrupt end to half a year of unanswered disappearances. The physical proof, 6 young lives lost and finally found, forced the case into public view, demanding answers from a system that had failed to protect its most vulnerable children. On October 14, 2004, the Pakdasht Criminal Court convened under Judge Mohammad Reza Gholam Ali. The charges laid out against Mohammed Bijeh were unambiguous: 16 counts of murder, 16 counts of rape and sexual assault, and the sweeping accusation of corruption on earth, a term in Iranian law reserved for those whose crimes are deemed a threat to the social order itself. Bijeh confessed in detail, describing how he lured boys with promises of hunting, led them into the desert, and disposed of their bodies. The court's sentence was severe and absolute: 16 death penalties, 1 for each murdered child, and 100 lashes for every count of rape. Ali Baghi, his accomplice, was convicted of kidnapping and aiding in the murders, receiving 15 years in prison and 100 lashes. The sentences were designed not just to punish, but to signal the weight of the crimes, justice delivered in the language of the law after months of silence and loss. On March 16, 2005, the main square of Pakdasht filled with a crowd of nearly 5,000. People pressed against metal barricades, some holding photographs of their lost children, others silent, faces set. Mohammed Bijeh was brought out, shirtless, his hands bound to a steel pole. The sentence began with 100 lashes, counted aloud by the crowd until a woman's voice broke through, pleading for it to stop. Grief and anger spilled over as a man, the father of one of the boys, slipped past the police line and stabbed Bijeh in the back. Riot police surged in with batons and tear gas, forcing the crowd back as the execution continued. A crane lifted Bijeh high above the square, and the chanting swelled, some calling for justice, others simply wanting it to end. Iranian state television broadcast the execution as a symbol of retribution, but outside the country the story barely registered. International media offered only brief mentions, their coverage drowned out by headlines about Iran's nuclear program and diplomatic standoffs. The UNHCR issued a short statement about the vulnerability of Afghan refugees, but there was no global outcry, no lasting attention. In Pakdasht, the spectacle was meant to close a chapter. For the families, and for the boys whose names never made the news, the silence continued. Today, the names of Pakdasht's lost boys remain largely unknown, buried by silence, fear, and policy. As millions of undocumented children still live in the shadows worldwide, their vulnerability endures. Justice isn't just about punishment, it's about who gets remembered. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.